We got to work on that. We want to continue in Hebrews this morning. And I'm going to back up and read the passage that I did last week, because it kind of goes along with what I'm going to talk about this week, though I'm not talking about all the same thing. But in Hebrews chapter 11, we'll begin with verse 17. Give him just a moment, he'll pull that up so you can read along with us. There we go. By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. By faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, and worshiped leaning on the top of his staff. By faith Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the departure of the children of Israel, and gave instructions concerning his bones. So we have a word about 4 different people, okay? And I titled this message, Faith with a Twist. Faith with a twist. Some things, in life have a twist to it, right? And it turn out different than what's expected. Have you ever had anything like that happen? You expected it to go one way, but it actually went a different way. Sometimes life and sometimes God throws a curveball at you. You think you could hit it, and you miss it altogether. You just miss what's going on. Now, I'm really not looking at the negative aspect of this morning, but really the positive. Because there's a thought that I have, and I'm going to try to convey that as we move on. There was a positive twist. Something you would have never expected to happen, happens, or will happen, or has happened. And things turn out different. And God has a blessing there for us. Interesting, not that I planned it that way, with Thanksgiving Thursday, right? And we usually, especially those who are people of faith, we kind of get our mind wrapped around the idea of this time of year of being thankful for what we have. And I found that thankfulness is a huge part when it comes to worship and praise to God. That being thankful can literally turn your life around. But we can do one or two things. We can just, and we all grumble sometimes, right? But we can get all caught up, and we can kind of get into a rut that we can't hardly get out of complaining about all the bad things in our life. I mean, it's easy to get to a point because sometimes we can go through a series of bad things. It just seems like it's one thing after another. And life is beating us up. But you can, if you're not careful, it will drag your mind into an area where all you can do is see the negative in everything. Now let's face it, a lot of us could do that today. We can get focused in to where you can't get out of that, to where you no longer even see what's good going on. Now God allows things like this to happen to us. God will allow one thing after another. But I think his idea usually, I'm probably sure there's more than one, but is to bring about something good as a result. Let's just face it, that our faith doesn't grow when everything's going good. We feel like we're strong men, but we're weaker then than we ever were, because we're not as reliant on God. We feel a little more confident. Things are going good. We're back up on the saddle again. But faith building experiences come when there's issues and hardships and difficulties. And it almost, I think at times, that the worser it is, the greater our faith can become. But we were more reliant on God. And like Abraham, see, the test sometimes is in this. Will we be faithful in the midst of the difficulty? Now, I want to bring out some similarities, because there is unexpected blessings, but there were similarities with all four of these men mentioned. First, let me just say, they were all men of faith. And by the way, I say man because the Bible says man, but woman is synonymous. Human, okay? Humanity. There are women mentioned in this chapter that were great women of faith. So it had nothing to do with that part. But all four of these men that were mentioned were men of great faith in God. They believed. All four of them believed in God and trusted God. Abraham, was known as a man of faith. And how could it be any less for a person to be willing to offer up his own son? And he went all those years without having a son. And then he has a son, and God says, you're going to have a son. And they doubted, and all these years go by, and 25 years later, they start to have one, a miraculous son in their old age, and Abraham 100 and her 90, way past the years of bearing children. And then God says, okay, go take him up there and kill him. I'm like, what? He couldn't have understood that, right? What a hard thing to do. And God wasn't going to let him go through with it, but Abraham didn't know that. Because when you read the scriptures, Abraham said, what the Bible says here, that Abraham believed God was going to raise him up. So Abraham thought he's going to have to go through this. And why wouldn't he? There was no other way. How do you get around this? I'm sure if there was some way to be obedient to God and get around this, Abraham would have done it. But there wasn't. God made it clear to him what to do. If he was anything like I am, I'd be thinking about, well, how else can I, handle this situation and do what God wants me to do? There wasn't any other way. He had to do what God said. And what a man of faith. He wasn't the only one. Isaac. This is where I go to number 2. Isaac was a person of faith. That was his son, his promised son. Jacob was a man of faith. That was his promised son. Joseph was a man of faith. And I'm just going to take you down this line because there's a reason that in this chapter that it mentions these four. This was 4 generations coming out from this family. 4 generations. And in each generation, there were more children, but this one was the promised seed. These that's mentioned in here, they were the promised seed. How could they have found faith but through their father and their mother? Abraham instilled a faith in Isaac. Now, Isaac could have just drifted. Isaac could have just went away. He could have said, well, I don't know what to do with this God. Well, he was about to kill me, right? Or he could have looked at the bright side and said, well, God saved his life. And sometimes it all comes down to our attitudes, and that is the way we look at something. Whether we choose to look at the bright side of it, or choose to try to just dwell in the negativity. I mean, by the way, all that does is drag you down and depress you and make you feel awful. That's what that does. Don't you know today, because there's a vast number of people today that deal with depression. A lot of folks are dealing with this stuff. And don't you know that it's just part of the plan of the devil. He wants to drag us down. He wants to depress you. God don't want you depressed. Do you think Jesus walked around depressed? He wasn't even depressed when he was hung on the cross. He wasn't depressed when he was falsely accused. He wasn't depressed in his life when people mocked him and made fun of him and wouldn't listen and wouldn't believe. And went behind his back talking about it. He was still never no evidence of depression in him. Satan though wants to use all the negative things that happen to harm us, but God wants to use them to make us better people, stronger people, people of more faith, like these men were. They passed their belief on to their kids. I want you to notice, to start with, and by the way, God was going to multiply blessings to these people, okay? First, they were all great people of faith who believed. Second, they passed their faith down to their kids. Now, you can pass your faith down. I know what some of you are thinking, because we can have kids that just doesn't follow us. Well, it happens. They have a choice. And I know that the Bible says, and I've heard it preached many a time, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. And sometimes people get on that one verse, and they act as if there's no other verse in the Bible. But that one, this is it. Bring them up right, they're going to all be saved. That's not right. We know that's not right. To believe something that's crazy, it doesn't make you a person of great faith. It might make you a person that's, I don't know what to say. I've gone the wrong way. No, it's a rule. It's not an absolute. It was a rule that if we train up our children in the way they should go, they will not depart. Meaning that this applies most of the time. But there are exceptions to rules. You see what I mean? If it was an absolute, there's no exception. And there are absolutes in the Bible. But it's a rule, and rules sometimes have variations. Most of them, maybe we say most of them, it's a rule. As a rule, we train them up right, they're going to follow. That's what happened in Abraham. But God was also in this. God was moving in this. God had a purpose in all of this, okay? And it wasn't just for Abraham's sake, it was for his son's sake, and for his son's sake, and his son's sake. So, now that we're people of faith, we need to pass that faith on to our children, who can pass it on to their children. That's important, that we be a good influence. And not that we say it, but don't live it, right? But that what we say, we try to live. You know, you can't just keep faith to yourself. You can't say, well, I have faith, but then you don't never put it into practice. That's not real faith at all. Jesus said, you don't light a candle to stick it up under a bushel. It'll go out. And he said, I'm the light of the world. But we're to put the light where the whole world can see it. Meaning that we're not to have just personal faith. Every time I think about it, I think about that lady I went to see at Goldsboro Hospital many, many, many years ago. It was a long time ago. And I went in there, and she was kin to one of my members, and I went in there and I talked to her. And I'd done been warned by her sister that she was a cat person. I'd been warned. And I went in there and talked to her, and she was not friendly. She would die of cancer. She was not friendly. She would not die. And finally I just said, well, I said, I'd like to pray for you. She said, well, you keep your prayers to yourself. And I'm like, sure you. So on time she ever had to. Almost everybody would say, okay, pray for me. I mean, even people who don't believe it, I'm like, well, I'll go ahead, ain't heard nothing. But not her, boy, she was just bitter and angry, and she was lazy. She didn't believe. I said, oh. I said, well, I'm going to pray for you anyway. I just won't do it here. You ain't going to stop me from praying for you now. You can't stop me from that. I may not do it in front of you, but I can always leave you do it. My God can hear that too. and I never seen her again. I don't think she lived a real long time after that. That's a terrible way to be. And you see, you can let your experiences drag you down to the point that you won't be right with God. Or you can move up past it. I'm going to tell you that there's a rut in life, and God will let you get in the rut, and when you're in the rut, you can't hardly get out of it. It's true. I was talking to Dorothy yesterday about it, and the same thing kind of happened to me one time. And I went through years and years and years without being in the ministry. I wasn't preaching. And there's people that hold that against me, too. I run into them, they still think I'm a fake fraud or something like that. What am I faking? I don't know what I'm thinking. Well, because I was years after I had left my church at Watson Grove, where I was pastoring, I went through years, about 12 years alone. I won't preach it anywhere. But let's get this story straight. I wasn't asked to preach anywhere either. Nobody did ask me. I thought they'd ask. I thought somebody'd say, come on, God. I was okay, I was ready to go. I was still preaching. Nobody never asked me. Years went by. Would they ask me to go to the church I was in? They'd asked me to go to the church I was in before that. I was asked to go to the other one. I was asked to speak over here. I was asked to speak there. Then all of a sudden, I was never asked again. I'm like, I don't understand what's going on, God. And so I was like, I was just puzzled for years and years and years. Not making no excuses. I feel like I was wrong during that period. I feel like, you know, as I look back, I should have made some kind of effort, but I didn't know what to do. I just kept going. Well, if God wants me somewhere, somebody will call. And nobody never seen me, and nobody wasn't circulating, and, you know, nobody, I guess, knew. But I'm like, look, God. And you can get in there. And I look back and I said, well, I was in a rut. I couldn't get out. I just didn't know what to do about this. And then just time went by. And every 2 or 3 months, I'd get on this, my thought, and it was excruciating. I was going through this. It was a mental battle. I didn't know what to do. And I just had to get my mind off of it, because I'm like, I just don't do it like this. And then the years went by, and one day, it was like a light went off, and one day, I said, well, I'm just going to do this. I went to this church during that period, and then the church lost its pastor. That happened over and over to me, by the way. Good here, and I was always going to church now. I went to church every single Sunday. But I won't preach. And so I went to this church right before something changed. I went to this church, and then I liked this guy. I said, well, you know, I think I could go here. I think I like the way he preaches. He's good. He's smart. Then he resigned. What? And I had went there once or twice, and he resigned. So I was, what's up with this? And in my mind, I was thinking, well, maybe they'll ask me to help fill in. Maybe I can be useful. Because I needed to speak. I needed to share. You probably don't feel that way. Well, I did. And it always felt that way. I had to preach and share. I should be speaking. That's what I can't get away from that thought, no matter what. Well, nothing happened. And nothing went about it. And finally, I'm like, one night, it was like a light went off, and I thought, well, maybe I need to go back to where I came from. That is, to the Freedom Baptist Church. Maybe I need to go back to a Freedom Baptist Church. And maybe I need to contact the board. And I'll just tell the preacher, and I knew him since I was a kid. I said, I've got to get back circuit. I got to somehow, maybe they'll recommend me. You know, I'll contact it. Well, why didn't I do that 12 years ago? See, that's the question. That the only answer that I can give you for it is I was in a rut, and I couldn't get out of the rut, no matter what. I'm just going to tell you folks, God can let you get in a rut. If you read chapter 1 of Romans, you will see the Bible said because they didn't recognize God as the Creator when they should have. Talking about people in general, he said he gave them up to their own lust. And it goes on to explain it, chapter 1 of Romans. God can allow us to make a decision and then let us live it. God can allow us to fall into a rut and we just can't seem to get out of it. No matter what. And that's what I say about that. And after that, when I stepped in the right direction, I don't think 2 months went by and I was pastoring again. Just technically. Went to the board, and the board met with me, and to make a long story short, about a month after that, he said, get busy. I'm like, well, I'm trying to get busy. I wish I could get busy. He said, well, Archie, meanwhile, you get busy. And then you come back in a year, there'll be no problem. Next thing you know, I got a phone call one day, and it was from Bobby Holly. Archie. And then it went on from there. And the next thing you know, I'm right back in the saddle again. You can get in a rut of complaining and criticizing. You can get in a rut of negativity about bad things that happen in your life. Or you can get out of it. And it's hard to do that without God. These were men of great faith. They all passed their faith along to others. They were witnesses. They were light of the world. They were the city up on top of the hill that everybody could see. And then third, they were highly blessed of God. But then what I'll tell you today is, if we are people of faith, men and women, if we're willing to share our faith, whether people like that or not, we let them know where we stand. We let them know we go to church. Because they don't have no trouble, by the way, letting you know what bad things they won't say. They'll say. Then we'll be all people blessed through God, like these men. There was a major blessing, a particular blessing, though they were blessed in many ways. These men were blessed in many ways. There was this big blessing that he gave to Abraham, called the Abrahamic covenant. It was where he told him, that he was going to make a great nation out of. He was going to give them this land, this promised land, this holy land. And that was that Abrahamic covenant. That particular blessing was not fulfilled in Abraham. It took a while, see. It went down the line. This same blessing that God gave to Abraham was the same blessing he gave to his son Isaac. It was the same blessing that Isaac passed down to Jacob, and it was the same thing that was passed down to Joseph. And by the way, after that, it was given to his son called Ephraim. This blessing about becoming a nation, this blessing about receiving this land, was an inheritance for his family that were people of faith, that passed their faith down to the next generation, that lived a blessed life and had plenty of issues along the way. Because that's the way we're going to have all these issues. We're going to have some difficulties. We're going to have some hardships. But we also have the blessings. So we enter Thanksgiving week, right? We need to remember the blessings. Not only Thanksgiving week, every week, right? Every day. We need to stop and think, well, now, that is terrible. And I hate what's going on. Or I can't do nothing about it. Or I don't know what's going to happen. But then, I did get out of bed this morning. Hey, I am moving around this morning. I am still breathing this morning. I do still have a place to live. I do still have some food to eat. I do have a job. I do have something to drive. And let's look at the bright side of things. Let's understand we are favored of God. We are blessed of God. And then last, I'm just going to tell you that all these people experience this twist. See, I noticed it as I was reading them, I went, what's the common with you? Wait a minute, something weird happened. Something strange. Something abnormal, if you will. That, like not the norm. Not the usual that happens. Not what you would expect would happen. And let me just tell you today that God is a God of the abnormal. He is not confined by science. He does not have to do everything the same way it was always done. God is able to switch things up. He's able to throw a twist in there. He's able to pull somebody out of the rut. He's able to change what's always been. He's able to do the impossible and make it possible. Things that we can find ourselves powerless to do anything about. Listen, our God can and will. If you're a great man or woman of faith, if you're willing to share your faith, He will perform a twist at times. Look at Abraham. Abraham had a little twist happen, something that was unexpected happen. When God had told him to take his son up there, well, and he was just about to kill him. He had the knife raised. And the Bible said, then God spoke to him and said, Abraham, don't you touch that lad. And apparently, I'm just going to read between the lines, because the Bible said there was a ram being at that moment caught in the thicket. Now, how that ram get caught in the thicket, right? It was a miraculous thing. It didn't just accidentally happen, right? And there are people that would say, oh, well, that all of a sudden this ram got stuck over here in the weeds. Huh? It didn't just happen, folks. God sent His angel to do this. And there was a ram for the sacrifice to take the place of Isaac, all of a sudden stuck in this thicket. I call it a twist in his faith. I call it an abnormality. Even if it was a long word. Abnormality. It was something that he never would have thought. Because Abraham thought that, well, God's going to bring him back to life. And the Bible said he took it as a figure. Well, we can definitely take it as a figure because it was a figure of Jesus Christ. He brought him back to life after he was slain upon the wood, right? He was a figure. He was a type of Christ, Isaac. And so God allowed this ram to be there. He provided the sacrifice. Abraham said, oh, I'm going to call this place Yahweh, Yahweh, which meant God provides. He named that place. So every time he'd get around that spot in Mount Moriah, he said, oh, this is where God provided. He could have said, oh, this is the place I almost had to kill my son, and right, and go on and on about that, how bad that was. And, I mean, can you kind of see yourself maybe falling into that kind of, I mean, I can kind of think, well, boy, I'll probably just, every time I get close, I don't even want to go to that spot anymore. I almost took my son's life, and it was a terrible place. Terrible! No, he said, this is a place that God provided. He chose to look at it this way. Look, how you choose to look at things is up to you. That's your decision. That's not anybody else's. Not your husband, not your wife, not your children, not your family, not your boss man. No, it's yours. How you choose to look at this thing. And maybe we should pray, God help us to look at things in the right way. And get his head. So Abraham had this twist. It was a twist in the sacrifice. Instead of having to kill his son, God provided the ram in the thicket, and he killed the sacrifice. But Isaac, his son, had a twist take place too with his children. When Isaac, his son, and his wife, Rebekah, when she was giving birth, she had twins. She had twins. That's twice the fun, right? Okay, so as they were being born, I can't get into all the details here, but as they were being born, Esau was coming out first. The Bible said Jacob, though, had a hold of his heel. He had a hold of his heel when he come out. So Esau was just a little bit older, right? A few seconds, but he's still dead. You know how the oldest in the family is. Might not be the oldest but a year, but I'm the eldest. Right. So here's Jacob holding on to his heel. Look, I'm just going to tell you, Jacob was always after what Esau had. Okay, I'm not telling you that was right. I'm just telling you, for whatever reason, God used this. And God knew what was going to happen. And that Jacob was supposed to be the one. That the promise, the blessing, was handed down to the big blessing. Esau was blessed in his life. Esau became a great people and a great nation that had a lot of substance and all this. God blessed him too. But the promised blessing was going to go to Jacob. And I'm not saying that the way it happened was right, but I'm just saying God knew that, because a lot of things really weren't right. How Jacob got a hold of everything. So Jacob was after Esau and what Esau was going to have day one when he was born. Later on, as they were growing up, Esau coming from the field, Esau was a hunter, Jacob kind of was a mama boy, he stayed at home and he cooked and all that stuff, and he did, all that kind of stuff. That's okay, it's not wrong. That's just the way it was. His father loved Esau because he was kind of the man's man. He'd go out hunting, right, and come home and Dad would eat the food he liked. One day, Esau was out there hunting, didn't really get anything. He come in starving, and he went to his brother's house, and he said, let me have some of that stew that you made. And he said, all right, sell me your birthright and I'll give it to you. That's kind of harsh, ain't it? And Esau did. He sold his own birthright for a pot of something to eat. But that was according to the Bible, that was the profane person that Esau was. If he'd been the right kind of person, he'd have never done that. And that's what the Bible says. But Jacob shouldn't have done what he done either. Okay, so. Then later on, as the father was dying, as Isaac was dying, Esau and Jacob were brought to him. Because in those days, they were going to pass a blessing. It was just the way they did things. And they knew they could do it. The father knew that when he was dying, he could pronounce a blessing, and it would come to pass. I don't know if that can happen these days. I don't know. I mean, if God don't tell you to do it, it probably ain't going to work. But it worked for them. And his eyes were getting dim and he couldn't hardly see, right? And so the mama got this idea that she wanted Jacob, she wanted Jacob, that was Rebecca. She wanted Jacob to get the blessing, not Esau, because that was her favorite. Esau was the father's favorite. So as he was dying, he told his son Esau, the eldest, he said, go out there and hunt some venison, Go get me some deer, man. Bring it back, and I want to eat. And then after I eat, and I'm feeling good, I get a little strength, I'm going to give you the blessing. And so Mama heard that, and she says, Jacob, she says, you're the one that needs to get this blessing. So she said, let's do this. Well, he's like, well, it's kind of deceitful. She said, well, I'll pay for the deceit. Let's do this. And she went out there, while Esau was going to hunt, she went out there and took one of the flock they had. And she literally took some of the skin because Esau was a hairy person. He was all hairy and everything. Like some folks I know. And Jacob, he's not very hairy. Right. But she took and cut some of the skin and put it on his hand and on the back of his neck because she knew that that's where the father would touch him to give the blessing. And his eyes were dim and he couldn't see. And she calmed him. His wife calmed him. And he thought, when Jacob come in first with the meat and everything, that he was Esau. And they lied. And he blessed him. And the blessing, because it was spoken, was blessing indeed. It was a switch. The blessing should have went to Esau because Esau was the eldest. But God switched things up. Esau, Jacob they would have never figured all this out, how to do this. But God worked this out. Because God wanted it to go to Jacob. I'm just saying that you can have a way planned in your life, and you can think you know how things are going to go, but God can throw a twist in there. God can throw a curveball. God can change what seems unchangeable. God can work the miraculous, crazy, wild things can happen. But I'm looking at it from a good side. A blessing like you can't imagine can come into your life. Preacher, I'd like to have that. Yeah, me too. I'll raise my hand on that one. Well, who knows? Like with Abraham, blessings can come early in your life. And they can come late in life. So Jacob had a twist in his life as he got older. And his father was dying. He took the two kids. No, let me get this right. Joseph took the two kids to his father, Jacob, as Jacob was dying. Okay? So we're following this chain. Jacob receives the blessing. Now Jacob is of age and he's dying. And his eyes are dim. He can't see good. And he's ready to pass on this blessing. This same blessing down to his kid. Naturally, it would go to the eldest, right? Joseph come in. Joseph was the one that was passed to. Now Joseph brought his two sons in. To one of them thinking Manasseh. Joseph had these two sons, one Manasseh and one Ephraim. Manasseh was the older. So I'm going to try to explain this to you so you understand. So he knew that his dad was going to reach out with the right hand and put it on him and pronounce this blessing, and that one was going to be blessed indeed with multitude possessions, income, prosperity, nation, property, all this stuff is going to pass along to this person. Well, it should be the eldest, right? Because the eldest that's the way they thought back then too. So Joseph purposely takes the oldest, Manasseh, and he puts his left hand on Manasseh. Because as he comes to father, he pushes it, and he says, father's like this, I'm turning it back to you. So now, the father's right hand would go on his left. So he put the oldest, he pushed the oldest with his left hand to the father's right hand so that the father would put the right hand on and give him the blessing. And guess what happened? He couldn't see. He didn't know who was who. He reaches out and he does this. And he blesses. And Joseph said, no, not so, Father. But Manasseh's the older, he's here. He said, I know. And then there was a switch in faith. There was this thing that they would have never imagined took place. It was abnormal. And God was in the middle of it. And this great blessing was passed on to the younger, Ephraim. And by the way, you can look through the Bible and you'll see. Not that you'll find a lot said about Ephraim, but what you'll find is that Ephraim, that name became synonymous with Israel. Like in Hosea. Ephraim. When it just say Ephraim, it was in reference to Israel. Why? Because he became Israel. He received the blessing. The Abrahamic covenant went down all the way to Ephraim. And Ephraim became the northern kingdom, Israel. There was even a twist with Joseph. It was a twist in his faith too. Something I don't think he would have knew. At the very end when he was dying, the Bible said he prophesied to his family, saying that one day you're going to go into captivity. And then he said God's going to deliver you from captivity. Then he says, I want you to take my bones with you to the promised land when you go. Now, I don't really care what happened to my bones. Now, we were talking about that this week. And I told Miss Audrey, I said, you know, I I don't care anymore, you know, some people don't want to do the, cremation, and some people still want the old funeral and all, and I'm just talking. I'm just after whatever's cheap, okay? I don't care what happens to my body after I'm gone. I'm not gonna be here. I'm gone. I don't care. Just do whatever's cheap. I said, Dorothy, just burn me right up. That's what I told her. I said, just burn me right up. I don't care. It's cheap. Just go cheap and save the money. Now, I'm not saying that to say, tell you what you can do with your remains. You do whatever you want to do with your remains. It doesn't make no difference to me. I'm not saying that you should do it this way. Okay? Ever how you want to do it. If you want a 5-star funeral service for $25,000, then that's your money. It doesn't matter. For me, when I draw my last breath, I'm out of here. I'm up there in glory land. It doesn't matter what you do with my body anymore, I'm out of here. Okay? But for some reason, Joseph thought, well, I want my bones to go there. And I guess Joseph was thinking that, you know, he hadn't seen this promised land, right? And I think Joseph was thinking, I might not be able to get there in my lifetime because I've lived in Egypt all these years. But you can take my remains there, and I will sort of get to the promised land like that with my bones. And you know they did. Look, Israel went into bondage right there in Egypt after Joseph died. They were in bondage for 400 years. And then God sent Moses and delivered them. And then they went to the promised land. You know, it took a while to get there. The Bible said they took his bones. They took Joseph's bones because he made them swear that they take his bones. They took his bones and carried it to the promised land. And so I guess he got there after death. But what a twist. But look, if you lived in a place all these years, you married in Egypt like Joseph did, your children were there and part Egyptian, right? Wouldn't you think you'd be buried there too? Your family's there now? What a twist. But it was because it was important to him. Why? Because God put it in his heart. This land, this promised land. God had put it in his heart. And he said, well, I want my bones carried there. And it was this twist of faith. Listen to these words, and I'm going to close out. Isaiah 43, 18 through 19. Do not remember former things, nor consider the things of old. In other words, don't get all stuck on the way things have always been. Behold, I will do a new thing. Now it shall spring forth. Shall ye not know it? I will even make a road in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. I'm just going to tell you, God's able to make a road where there is no road. He's able to take a desert and spring forth water. God says, I'll do a new thing. And God's going to do a new thing for us. Let us stand and close out with a song.